Hello, my name's David Cross and I'm an artist and reader in art at University of the Arts, London. From planetary boundaries to Sumak Kawsay could be viewed as the range between 2 points on a spectrum. But when exploring degrowth, it might be more helpful to think in terms of a journey from one position to another. Here in London, the position we start from is conflicted. Short-term objectives can derail long-term aims, and private self-interest can undermine public good. But the key conflict to consider today is between economic growth and ecological survival. Conflicting emotions or desires may be an eternal part of the human condition, but the conflict between economic growth and ecological survival is the result of historical processes. London's dominance as a global financial centre today was built on its accumulation of wealth as capital of the British Empire, which was powered by slave labour and fossil fuels. This image is a still from a video work I made titled Timeless. One midsummer's day, I went to the top floor of the Shard, Britain's tallest building, which casts a long shadow across London, like the needle of a sundial. I positioned my camera to record the view looking east to the financial district of the Docklands and the historic maritime centre of Greenwich. This photo, looking west from Greenwich, shows the Shard and the City of London on the horizon, the London Docklands in the middle distance, and the old Royal Naval College in the foreground. Although the photo juxtaposes these elements, it says little about the continuity between the maritime history of the British Empire and the global financial system that is driving economic growth towards ecological collapse. Following the invasion of Latin America by Christopher Columbus in 1492, European powers financed seafaring voyages in a race to discover territories that could be captured and exploited through colonisation. Advances in navigation and shipbuilding enabled the transport of extracted materials, increasing economic growth and the development of imperialism and capitalism in a mutually reinforcing cycle. In the Atlantic trade triangle, ships carrying cheap trinkets, cloth, iron and guns sailed from Britain to Africa, where their cargoes were sold or exchanged for people who had been abducted to be used as slaves. These African people were imprisoned below the decks of ships in abominable conditions and transported across the Atlantic to the colonies. On arrival, the abducted African people were sold to labour on plantations, whereupon the slavery ships would be cleaned and loaded up with sugar, tobacco and cotton, returning to England to begin the cycle again. The Atlantic trade triangle established the dynamic expansion of capitalism, with profits from each leg of the journey, each part of the system strengthening the other parts in a feedback loop of increasing material and energy flows. 10 million people were taken by force from Africa and transported as captives under conditions so inhumane that many risked unarmed insurrection and even resorted to suicide. This economic system allowed slave traders, plantation owners and commodity merchants to accumulate vast quantities of gold and silver, which they used to build stately homes and buy political influence in Britain. When slavery was abolished, slave owners were paid by the government compensation for their loss of property. Research by the UCL Centre for the Study of the Legacies of British Slavery traced these payments to show that the wealth accumulated continues to influence the British economy and political system today. In his 1944 book, Capitalism and Slavery, Eric Williams wrote of plantations, quote, "From the standpoint of the grower, the greatest defect of slavery lies in the fact that it quickly exhausts the soil. The labour supply of low social status, docile and cheap, can be maintained in subjection only by systematic degradation and by deliberate efforts to suppress its intelligence. Rotation of crops and scientific farming are therefore alien to slave societies. Williams' forensic analysis shows why plantation slavery embodied the expansionist logic of capitalism. Because forced labour is inefficient and wasteful, its profitability lies in extracting maximum yield by deforesting the land, depleting the soil, and degrading people. The money accumulated from plantation slavery and from the resulting increase in trade with the colonies powered the next phase of capitalist growth, the Industrial Revolution. In his 1972 book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, Dr. Walter Rodney wrote of how James Watt expressed, quote, eternal gratitude to the West Indian slave owners who directly financed his famous steam engine and took it from the drawing board to the factory. In 2019, research by Dr. Stephen Mullen found that the Watt family didn't just borrow money from slave owners, they were also directly involved in the transatlantic slave trade in sugar, tobacco, and people. James Watt's improvements to the steam engine were critical to the development of factory production, which massively accelerated economic growth across the empire. The Industrial Revolution wasn't a linear process of technological advances driving economic growth, but a set of feedback loops with increased material extraction and production supporting a rise in population, which in turn produced a further increase in economic demand. Eric Williams shows that slavery was only abolished when political and economic changes made slave labour relatively less profitable. At this point, the burning of fossil fuels powered the next stage of economic growth, consolidating the domination of people and planet through imperial expansion. With growing demand for commodities, British and European colonisers applied steam power and unfree labour to strip vast areas of tropical forest for monoculture plantations of cash crops, devastating whole ecosystems and the lives of the people who depended on them. The British Empire Marketing Board maintained popular support for imperialism and capitalism through appeals to British exceptionalism, such as through this poster depicting the planet with the continents arranged around Britain at the centre of an early system of global supply chains. The Marketing Board celebrated the benefits of empire to the British consumer, while aestheticising the division of labour according to gender, class and race. There are direct lines of continuity between imperial colonialism and the neo-colonial era of financial capitalism today. Michael Oswald's documentary, The Spider's Web, shows how as the British Empire declined, the colonial administration devised a system of financial mechanisms to continue Britain's economic growth by extracting wealth from the former colonies and then hiding it in secrecy jurisdictions, also known as tax havens. Today, the City of London channels enormous sums of money from around the world into weapons, fossil fuels, and the unsustainable extraction of resources. It's often claimed that economic growth lifts people out of poverty. But for this to be true, capital accumulation must be contained within the carrying capacity of the planet and countered by systems to redistribute wealth, including fair trade, progressive taxation, and reparations for loss and damage from climate breakdown. Instead, masked by the abstractions of finance, corporate lobbyists, consultants, lawyers and accountants work to bypass and dismantle these systems, increasing extreme inequality and ecological degradation. It's common knowledge that climate breakdown hits hardest and soonest on the vulnerable and marginalised people of the Global South, who not only did the least to cause the damage, but also are the least equipped to cope with its impacts. What is not so well known is that the reason they're least equipped is because their societies have been systematically dispossessed by centuries of colonialism and decades of globalization. Clearly, economic growth cannot continue infinitely on a finite planet. The Limits to Growth, published in 1972, showed why. The authors didn't make predictions, but instead used computers to model interactions between projected levels of consumption, population, and the capacity of the planet to yield resources and absorb pollution. From these projections, they developed different scenarios. They coined the term business as usual to label a scenario in which economic growth leads to economic and societal collapse. The thesis and its methods were attacked and ridiculed, then ignored. But subsequent research by Graham Turner and others shows that the empirical data tracks closely with the projections leading to collapse. It isn't the role of art to solve such problems, though art might help people to see the problems differently. This sculpture from 2009 by the Palestinian artist Mona Hatoum is titled Hotspot. It envisions the globe with the land and sea outlined in red neon, fixed to a grid of latitude and longitude made from steel bars forming a cage. Like an oversized branding iron or an overheated emblem of a multinational corporation, the sculpture dominates the space with an ambiguous sign of enclosure and exclusion. Also in 2009, the Stockholm Resilience Centre combined an image of the globe with a grid to identify planetary boundaries in the Earth system. While the green zone at the centre shows a safe operating space for humanity, the red zones suggest how far the ecological impacts of economic growth have exceeded the planetary boundaries. The planetary boundaries framework has been enormously influential as it enables different ecological impacts of economic growth to be seen in relation to each other and in relation to the Earth system. Although the authors did call for research on the societal dynamics that have led to the current situation, the planetary boundaries don't explore social and political issues, such as who is causing the problems and who is suffering the consequences. This graph from the Statistical Review of World Energy by British Petroleum shows world energy consumption per capita by region. Two lines on this graph stand out. The green one at the top showing energy consumption in North America, and the red line at the bottom showing energy consumption in Africa. Clearly, North America must radically cut its energy consumption, while the people of Africa have the right to consume more. But with ecological breakdown already reversing the gains made from modern development, the nations of Africa have been trapped into a tragic choice between exploiting their fossil fuel reserves, which would accelerate climate breakdown, and leaving the fossil fuels in the ground, which could lock their people in poverty. Meanwhile, the development of renewable energy systems is being left to private corporations, who respond to market forces rather than social need or political justice. Within a growth-based paradigm, building the infrastructure for renewable energy means extracting vast quantities of high-energy materials, including aluminium, concrete and steel, undermining the material improvements being aimed for. Plus, trying to generate enough renewable energy to sustain economic growth massively increases demand for critical minerals such as lithium. Babawale Obayanju of Friends of the Earth Nigeria wrote that COP28's goal of tripling renewable energy, quote, leaves countries where transition minerals are located vulnerable to more land grabs, environmental destruction and violations of their rights and livelihoods. For example, in the Atacama Desert in Chile, producing lithium by evaporation involves extracting underground water resources, dispossessing the communities that depend on them, and damaging the fragile desert ecosystem. Cobalt is another critical mineral for renewable energy, and the surge in global demand means big profits from employing people on low pay under exploitative labour relations and dangerous working conditions, such as in the Democratic Republic of Congo. As War on Want and the London Mining Network have shown, the extraction of minerals for renewable energy continues the long history of colonialism, which enriches people who are already rich and impoverishes people who are already poor. Renewable energy cannot replace current levels of fossil energy use in the developed world, much less power a Western model of development in the formerly colonised countries. Obviously, the fastest and fairest way to live within planetary boundaries would be for the wealthy to consume less. Yet capitalism is based not just on the production of goods and the rational pursuit of self-interest, but on the production of extreme inequality and the destructive pursuit of infinite growth on a finite planet. As the transition to renewable energy is used to accelerate another round of economic growth, Jean Ray asks whether the problem is not capitalist modernity, but, quote, modernity as such. This gripping addiction to energy, consumption, novelty, speed. This blind adoration of technology and blind trust in science. This internalized allegiance to the dogmas of growth, development and progress. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, envisions the future of humanity as a multi-planet species. Taking colonialism to new frontiers, Musk is using the profits from the Tesla Corporation to fund his SpaceX venture, which aims to establish a colony on Mars for billionaires. Back down to Earth. The Stockholm Resilience Centre has recently updated its assessment of the planetary boundaries. Climate change today is just one of 6 of these boundaries that have now been breached, so economic growth has already taken the world far beyond the safe operating space for humanity. The Centre's research comes from an unusual culture of collaboration, which reduces competition, such as through copyright over intellectual property. They say, most scientists are hesitant of sharing their best ideas because of the fear someone will take them as their own. But in our experience, if 3 separate individuals share their best ideas, this will result in a 4th and 5th idea, each greater than the individual first 3. Since 2012, Kate Raworth has developed the Planetary Boundaries framework, proposing a safe and just space for humanity, which complements the environmental ceiling of ecological limits with a social foundation of human rights. Raworth's diagram includes the 9 planetary boundaries and adds to them 11 basic elements of the social foundation: food, water, income, education, resilience, voice, jobs, energy, social equity, gender equality, and health. In a paper from 2020 titled "From Planetary to Societal Boundaries, an Argument for Collectively Defined Self-Limitation," a group of 29 social science researchers developed Raworth's model, arguing for a constructive critique of the planetary boundaries concept that is rooted in the definition of societal boundaries. The authors question whether privileged researchers in the global north have the right to decide on what is an acceptable level of damage from economic growth. And they argue instead that societal boundaries ultimately depend on a conception of social freedom which they define as the right not to live at the expense of others. Planetary health is another influential framework that relates the planetary boundaries to social, economic and political factors. In 2014, Richard Horton and colleagues at the Lancet Medical Journal defined planetary health as the health of human civilization and the natural systems on which it depends. Western medical science is based on systems within the human body. Planetary health broadens health research to include the external systems that sustain or threaten human health. A key insight informing planetary health is that in recent years, continued economic growth has not resulted in a net enhancement of human well-being. In fact, with pollution, climate breakdown and biodiversity destruction, many of the gains of modern progress are being reversed and life expectancy is falling. For example, it's clear that destroying tropical forests for beef, sugar and cocaine is harmful to human health and to the planet. Destroying tropical forests is a key driver in the emergence of zoonotic diseases, such as the coronavirus, which jump from animals to people. Also, the world depends on tropical forests for medicines including anesthetics, antibiotics, cancer drugs, contraceptives, muscle relaxants and pain relievers. Advances in microscopic imaging are revealing that the surfaces of the body are permeable sites of interaction between the human and the more than human, such as these beneficial gut microbes. The closer we look, the more we see complexity and richness in the relationships between internal and external systems that sustain human health. Approaching the relationship between human health and the planetary ecosystem through farming, La Via Campesina is an international movement which coordinates peasant organisations, agricultural workers, rural women and indigenous communities from Asia, Africa, America and Europe. La Via Campesina declares, quote, "Food sovereignty is a philosophy of life. It defines the principles on which we organise ourselves in our daily lives and coexist with Mother Earth. It is a celebration of life and the diversity that surrounds us. It embraces every element of our cosmos, the sky above our heads, the earth beneath our feet, the air we breathe, the forests, mountains, valleys, fields, oceans, rivers and ponds. It recognises and protects the interdependence between 8 million species that share this home with us." La Via Campesina connects food sovereignty and soil health with collective self-determination of communities in the planetary struggle to defend a habitable Earth and a stable climate. La Via Campesina mobilises eco-feminist approaches to social justice. Campaigning against violence towards women, they produce public information such as this poster explaining that illiteracy is high among campesina women who as young girls go without education to start work in the fields. In Ecuador and Bolivia, Buen Vivir, which is Spanish for living well, is one alternative to capitalist social relations. Instead of prioritising economic growth, Buen Vivir claims to meet people's needs through democratic social organisation and balance with nature. So it could be seen as the South American version of degrowth. But, as Javier Cuestas Casa has shown, the term Buen Vivir is contested. Perhaps because Spanish is the language of the European coloniser of South America, Buen Vivir misrecognises the Andean philosophy of Sumak Kawsay which it draws from. Whereas Buen Vivir is rooted in the Western aspiration to personal happiness, Sumak Kawsay is rooted in the Andean philosophy of living, which Cuestas Casa says rests on a deep relationship with nature and on an institutionalised communitarian sense, which is evidenced mainly in rituals, parties and celebrations. Sumak Kawsay translates not simply as Buen Vivir, or living well, but as life in plenitude, beautiful life, harmonious life, or harmonic living together. Sumak Kawsay is based on ancestral indigenous knowledge and practices from communities of the Ecuadorian Andes, where family and community coexist in harmony with the Pachamama, or Mother Nature. Sumak Kawsay values balance, harmony, creativity, serenity, ancestral knowledge, socio-political organisation, communal work, and reciprocity. Sumak Kawsay could complement approaches based on the planetary boundaries and inform an intercultural approach to economic degrowth. but aiming to assimilate indigenous knowledges into a Eurocentric model of social and technological organisation risks cultural appropriation and overlooks deeper differences of worldview. Indigenous peoples make up less than 5% of the world's population, but through their cultural practices they protect 80% of global biodiversity. In 2008, indigenous social movements pushed the Republic of Ecuador to adopt a new constitution which granted inalienable rights to Mother Nature, or Pachamama, including the right to exist, persist, and regenerate its vital cycles, structures, and evolutionary processes. This move aligned with the participatory, democratic aspect of Buen Vivir and its aim of balance with nature. But it soon clashed with the aim of the modern state to lift people out of poverty through economic growth, which depends on extractivism. So the struggle to uphold the legal rights of nature faces constant opposition from the extractive industries, which are often supported by the state. For example, the Ecuadorian government approved El Mirador, one of Ecuador's biggest mining projects, which aims to extract over 3 million tonnes of copper, 27 million ounces of silver, and 3 million ounces of gold. The mine has already dumped millions of tonnes of toxic sludge in a vast pool held back by the earth dam shown in this photo. Now, plans to expand production by 500% are increasing physical pressure on the dam. If, or more likely when, the dam collapses, the communities living in the valley below could be wiped out. So this dam and the mine behind it make up a set of boundaries and thresholds which embody the question: can the industrial way of life, with its logic of expansion and its figuring of the planet as a resource pool and waste sink, can it coexist with cultures that practice a harmonious and stable interaction with living systems? If endless growth is integral to the modern project, then clearly it cannot be expected to restrain itself. Only collective action can resist the power of a corporation. While private media promote endless economic growth, and corporations co-opt the state to legitimate extractivism and suppress civil resistance, indigenous peoples are taking great risks to protect their way of life and the rights of the living systems of our shared planet. The line from the technocratic approach of planetary boundaries to the philosophy and practice of Sumak Kawsay is just one axis across a broad terrain of alternatives to growth. These alternatives reflect different methods, different forms of social organisation, and different beliefs about the meaning and purpose of existence. These differences might cause tensions and could even result in splits. But the common goal of a flourishing planet is a vital point of connection where solidarity and collective action can generate new insights and possibilities for cultural transformation. To conclude, I propose that we listen carefully to the words of Nemonte Nenquimo, an indigenous leader of the Waorani peoples of the Ecuadorian Amazon.
Mi nombre es Nemonte Nenquimo, soy mujer Waorani, madre líder de mi pueblo. Cuando yo era joven, primera vez salí a la ciudad de escuela misionera para poder aprender español. Yo nunca tuve la oportunidad para ir a la universidad, pero yo tengo a los piquenanis, a los sabios que me han enseñado de tener ese conocimiento, de respetar, de tener amor a la selva. Y de eso me ha crecido de ser líder. La selva es nuestro maestro, maestra. Los piquenanis, los sabios, mujeres, tanto hombres sabios, son nuestro científico, nuestro maestro que nos ha enseñado, y ese valor, ese conocimiento, ese amor tenemos. pero lo que decimos como pueblos indígenas, ese valor se han perdido la gente de afuera. La selva es nuestra casa, la selva nos da toda la vida a nosotros, la comida, alimentación, agua, conexión espiritual, pero la llegada de carretera, la llegada de colonización, la llegada de evangélicos, la llegada de petrolera, nos ha destruido nuestra selva. Y conocí a otros indígenas que viven en el norte, que ellos fueron primer contacto con la colonización, invasiones carreteras. Es muy triste. La gente que están mirando, escuchando, me gustaría decir que nuestra Amazonía sigue quemando en el bosque, el petróleo sigue derramando y el minero sigue entrando en nuestro territorio, robando nuestros oros, y las colonizaciones siguen invadiendo para talar y alimentar a sociedades de afuera. Eso quiero hacer conocer a nosotros directamente, nos está perjudicando, nos están arriesgando la vida de nuestros pueblos amazónicos en todo el país. Nosotros como pueblos indígenas hemos venido luchando a esa tierra por miles de años porque tenemos mucho amor y respetamos. Por eso es importante que escuchen nuestras voces, nuestros gritos, nuestros lloros, para que no vaya más a perjudicar en nuestra selva, porque ustedes no están escuchando. Más de 25% superficie de la tierra está protegido de los pueblos indígenas. Esto incluye casi la mitad del bosque del mundo. Yo pienso que la gente de afuera, que decimos nosotros como mujeres indígenas, que son gente cure, conocen menos en la selva. Por eso ellos no le importa la vida de la selva, no le importa la vida de la espiritual, no le importa la vida de que cómo nosotros vivimos conectados por miles de años respetando a la madre tierra. Por eso es importante como mujer, digo, de ese aprendizaje que como mujer joven aprendido que la vida que Kuren piensa que es la tecnología, desarrollo es mejor, pero no tiene conciencia que a la vez están destruyendo el planeta. Y si siguen esos como ciegos, nosotros decimos la gente menos que conocen la selva son ciegos. Nosotros como indígenas somos que estamos abiertos los ojos, sabemos lo que está pasando. Core es para nosotros un extraño que no valora, que no tiene conocimiento hacia los bosques. ¿Qué significa bosque para nosotros? Para el pueblo guaraní, el bosque significa es nuestra casa, nuestra vida, lleno de conocimientos. Tú puedes caminar, ahora puedes caminar, estoy viendo yo alrededor las plantas que podemos comer, las hojas que podemos curar, bejuco podemos utilizar para nuestros canastos, para cargar, madera para hacer construir la casa, buena madera, las hojas para dolor de cabeza. Pero si yo traigo a un cure no va a pensar como yo estoy viendo. Cure no tiene ese conocimiento, piensa que ahí es un regalo, un lugar de recursos, están sacando. La palabra cure no tiene que ser malo. Ustedes son capaces de tener ese valor, el conocimiento que tenemos nosotros como pueblos amazónicos en general. Pueden aprender, pueden respetar, pueden aliarse con nosotros.